Hi, I'm Dr. Linda Mintle. Hey, thanks for listening to the Dr. Linda Mintle Show. Faith radio podcasts are only possible because of your support. Thanks for giving and for sharing with a friend.
Doing life together, reaching out with hope, encouraging one another, each step along the road. You and I can make everything a little better, doing life together.
Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to the Dr. Linda Mintle Show. I'm your host, Dr. Linda Mintle, the relationship doctor, and I'm here along with my co-host, the other Dr. Mintle, my husband, Norm. And every weekend we're here, we're doing life together, and we're always so glad that you joined us.
It is indeed the weekend, so time for another Dr. Linda Mintle radio show and podcast. So we're glad you're joining us. And since I said the word podcast, I want to remind you, you can listen to this program anytime on your favorite podcast platform. Take it with you. Walk, jog, drive, fly, whatever you want to do.
I listen to the show when I'm out for a walk. I listen to it to see how it went and, how extraordinary it is.
Right.
And it's really easy because then it makes me walk at least 30 minutes.
Oh, perfect.
Right. So that's a good timing thing for me.
Well, today we have a very interesting topic, and it involves marriage. Oh my gosh, are we surprised? No. You are the relationship doctor. But in this case, marriage is something we know a little bit about because we've been married for a very long time. Full disclosure, we were very, very young.
That's true. We met in college and we married when I was a junior. And I think you were out of school at the time, right?
Ready for grad school.
Yeah,
right.
You were ready to go. So I would say being married young has its advantages and its disadvantages. But I'm glad we did it, so I'm not having any regrets sitting here.
Good.
However, today we're going to talk about those who do just the opposite of what you and I did.
Which was what?
They're deferring marriage until they're much older.
Okay. Well, this idea did come from a fascinating recent article on deferring marriage in the Wall Street Journal, of all places. It raised concerns about the shift we're seeing away from building a family starting in your 20s. Rather, more millennials, more Gen Zs are pouring their energy into self-care and self-exploration and even pets.
I know I read the part about pets, but I thought it's true. Look at all the marketing towards pets and having your pet with you. So that is a big deal. What was going on in that article that was so interesting to the both of us when we were looking at it was that it's looking at the very fabric of our culture, which has traditionally been men and women committing themselves to marriage, and we would say in a covenant relationship, right? Building families with children and grandchildren towards a future of hope.
The writer noted how many people are questioning this traditional view you just mentioned, feeling uncertain and anxious about the future. Marriage, which has provided people with comfort and protection for hundreds, thousands of years, is now on the decline. In fact, in the last 50 years, the marriage rate in the U.S. has dropped, are you ready for this? Almost 60%.
Wow. Right. And the writer cites numerous sources that say the shift away from marriage is actually reaching epic numbers, which would support that statistic, right? He says that the shift began during the sexual revolution of the 1960s, followed by the increasing divorce rates of the 1970s. And I read a little bit more about that, and it was related to a lot of people getting divorced in the 1970s because of all the sexual revolution and everything that was going on. And these children of divorce do not want that for themselves. So today, many of those millennials are those children of divorce, and they're afraid of divorce.
Sure.
And Gen Zs are sharing a similar view.
And then you add to that the rise of cohabitation as a factor in this trend away from marriages. A lot of couples think that cohabitation serves as kind of a test drive. Let's see if we're compatible, and believe that cohabitation decreases the number of divorces. But instead, shockingly, many researchers have found that cohabitation before marriage has historically actually been connected with greater probabilities of divorce.
Yeah, and I don't find that shocking at all because it was God's plan. So is God going to give us a plan that isn't going to work?
Right.
Did God go, oh man, I should have given them a test drive and just let them live together for a while and see how it worked out?
I'm going to rethink this.
Yeah, no, marriage is a sacred, it's a holy commitment. It's a sacrament in many of the main churches. in which two become one and they submit their lives to the Lord.
And the more secularized our culture becomes, the more we have lost this moral position. Marriage has been reduced to a contract that if it doesn't work, okay, I'll break the contract.
Yeah. And people believe you can be happy, you can be wealthier, and you really don't need marriage. You can hook up when you want to have sex. And so what happens, Norm, is they don't see the need for this family structure because they think they can flourish somehow without it. And so in this sort of anti-marriage scenario, children are increasingly seen as expensive. They're in the way of your own pursuits. And they're kind of seen as an annoyance in a lot of these circles. And we know it's not biblical, but is it true? Does this actually make people feel better?
Well, interestingly, as professor of sociology at the University of Virginia votes, no, it's not true. He has found that married men and women are wealthier than those who are not married, and couples with children are happier than childless couples. Additionally, children from intact families are more likely to finish college and less likely to be abused.
And we're not saying that everybody in those categories fits that, but
No.
these are overall general statistics. So in other words, what he's saying, when you look at the impact of this modern view of marriage, it doesn't seem to be what people are being told. This notion that marriage will somehow trap you, will stunt you, will bring you to poverty, it's actually nonsense. But it's a really powerfully loud voice in our culture.
Oh, to your point, there's a social influencer who recently said, there is zero advantage to marriage in the Western world for a man.
I mean,
Based on what?
Yes, that's what I was going to say, based on his own experience, because he feels that way. And we had a show on feelings and how unreliable those are.
Well, the New York Times also ran a piece that glorifies the freedom, the personal control, and the self-realization of living alone. And The Atlantic ran a piece called The Case Against Marriage. And Time magazine chimed in and said, you can have it all without having children.
Yeah, so this message is basically that marriage and a family gets in the way of your personal growth.
Yep.
It's the narrative catching on with many young people, and marriage rates, as we noted, are plummeting as a result of that. That UVA professor also found that only 40% of working class adults between the ages of 18 and 55 are married.
Wow.
That's less than half.
It's less than half.
Yeah. The result of all this negative press towards marriage is that young people are deciding to avoid it or defer it. And their energies are going more into self-care and, I guess, pets, right?
And as a result, birth rates are also lower as more and more people have concerns about all the reasons not to have children.
So with all this negativity, I think what happens is we can get sucked into thinking, I'm not going to get married. I'm not going to bring children into this world. Is it really God's plan for us to react to things in fear? So interestingly, we don't think about how this results in a loss of human connection. Loneliness, which we're seeing in epic rates in our culture, right?
Epic.
And fewer opportunities for love and joy. And in the long run, we may find, and I do believe this to be true, that our personal autonomy is not all it's cracked up to be. And interestingly, all those who mock Christians for believing in marriage and family have not found the essence of happiness. Instead, they experience constant anxiety.
Wow. And we do know that a stable and functional culture requires stable marriages that nurture families. Communities always survive best in these structures.
Right, which is why marriage is important. Now, there are some positive effects of delaying marriage. So we're not going to say that there's, no advantages to this. For example, you're probably going to be more mature. You're going to be more likely to be maybe a good spouse as a result of that. You are more likely to achieve your personal goals without having to look back and go, oh, I have regrets about this. And there can be some advantages spiritually and physically because the brain is fully developed if you wait a little longer and you make better decision making. So it's not all a gloomy picture, but it's the message that is really disturbing to us.
And I think you could throw into that list that you're probably better ready for children because now you're more eager to have them But there sure is something to be said about maturity. We've mentioned that we married young, and immaturity has been a problem once in a while along the way.
Yeah.
However, we've both continued in our professional growth. We finished college and grad school together as a very economically challenged couple.
We were very economically challenged.
Very, weren't we?
We made $4,000 one year. That was
First
it.
year.
And then I think it went up to $4,400 the next. So we were
baby, we were
eating those
skying.
5-for-1 macaroni and cheese is a lot, which was not exactly healthy. Okay, we're not saying that delaying marriage is a bad thing, but we're looking at the reasons why.
Right.
So it's why are more people choosing to do this? And the message in many of these circles that we've mentioned is that if you don't defer to later adulthood, there's something wrong with you, and you're not progressive. And you really have to think about, why are you not attending to your own autonomy?
Well, the good news is that some groups are bucking this trend of deferring marriage. One of those groups is the Christian church. Despite being scarred by the divorce of their parents, Christian young adults who choose to marry still do value building a family, and they understand it's important to flourish.
Yeah. And for the Christian, marriage is more, like we said, it's more than just a stable structure. The Bible affirms marriage, not just for economic or sociological reasons, but for moral and spiritual reasons as well, as God did design sex for marriage. I know that's hard to hear that, isn't it?
Yeah.
In our culture.
Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh.
Now, we want to be really clear that we're not looking down on people who don't marry, who haven't yet found their person, who are struggling with infertility, or those who are called to be single. The Apostle Paul fulfilled God's great calling on his life as a single man. But throughout history, marriage has stood as a sacred institution in which we find meaning and purpose. And if you're considering whether to marry or not, you should carefully and prayerfully consider and even challenge maybe the reasons why you might be thinking not to do that.
Mm-hmm. I know that looking back on our lifetime, I remember when people would consider a single 30-year-old woman to be a spinster. But today, many label a 24-year-old who decides to marry as someone to be pitied. What has led us to this point?
I know there's just lots of factors that go into this shift, but one of them is this notion we're talking about today, that in order to find yourself, to be independent, have lots of experiences, do a lot of trial relationships, and personal autonomy, Norm, has become a religion.
Wow. And due to that push for personal autonomy, early marriage is promoted now as bad, and deferred marriage is better. Well, do you agree or disagree with this message that's being promoted to our younger generation? Stay with us. We're going to keep talking about this right after the break.
Conflict is a part of every healthy relationship. How you deal with conflict is what will either grow or destroy relationships. Do you avoid? Maybe you become highly emotional and then regret what you said or did. Getting control of our emotions is not always easy, but it is possible. Hi, this is Dr. Linda Mintle, and I wrote the book We Need to Talk in order to help all of us deal better with conflict. We Need to Talk, available at bookstores and online where books are sold.
We welcome you back to the Dr. Linda Mintle Show. Today we're talking about deferring marriage. Is that a good idea? We have a lot more to talk about on that topic. But before we do, I want to remind you can check out Dr. Linda's website at drlindamintle.com. And there you're going to find her blogs, her books, and you can connect with her on social media. You can listen to our podcast anytime on your favorite platform.
And I did write a book on marriage.
I
wanted to bring that up.
Good point.
It was originally called Divorce Proofing Your Marriage.
Right.
And I actually really liked that title. And then the publisher decided that they would rename it to I Married You, Not Your Family, and 9 Other Myths About Marriage. So if you're looking for some just advice about marriage and what's involved and what makes a marriage work, that's a nice book to help couples, young or old.
Right. And when we have talked to couples contemplating marriage, we've often given them that book.
Yeah.
Because it's a great read to say, these are a lot of the misconceptions we have about marriage.
And a lot of the myths,
and
yeah.
some of them are not true.
Right. And they're cultural myths. And they're myths sometimes based on a secular view versus the biblical view, which is one of the things I always do in my books is bring out that biblical view in everything that we're talking about.
And today we're talking about this push in our culture to defer marriage until you're older. I don't know if there's a magic number.
Well, there is actually in the research. They kind of define it for their surveys.
They did. And they said 28 for women and 30 for men. That doesn't sound terribly deferred to me, but there you go. And we're discussing the advantages and disadvantages and the attitudes behind the change.
Norm, that's way different than it was years ago.
True.
Like if you weren't married by early 20s, you were somehow, like they said, defective, with something. So it is a big shift.
Well, here's one of the problems that you and I have heard from young adults who have purposely delayed marriage. When they do decide they're ready, something has happened. The pool to choose from has shrunk. It's harder to meet eligible men and women.
Yeah, and again, we're not talking about you haven't met that person and that you would like to be married and you're looking. We're talking about people who have purposely said, I don't have time for a person because I have to do all these things and I have to create a certain lifestyle before I can even put somebody into that equation. And then that's when it happens. Then they're like, okay, I'm ready. Wait, where do I meet these people? And it's, the dating apps, I don't know. I think the jury's out on that. When they first started, there were some Christian couples I know who met that way, but they're getting weirder. And they're getting, in my opinion, I don't know, that's probably not a great, it's my opinion. Talking to a lot of young people who say, I don't know, you don't meet the best on there because they can create a profile that isn't really like them.
Right.
So it's really hard. And you don't want to, as a Christian person, you don't want to go to a bar and meet somebody. It's not the place to do it. So, step up, churches. You need to be having some single activities and getting people to meet each other.
Well, as you said, where are all those kids? Where are the young Christian singles?
Yeah, and those adult ministries are tough. I mean, we're in a church right now where they finally just started an adult ministry. We couldn't believe they didn't have one. And you want people to be able to get together with their biblical worldview and be able to sort of, even if they start as friends, that's a good thing.
But you and I have both also heard people say, well, young adult ministries for singles is just like speed dating.
I know, but it doesn't have to be, especially if you just go with the idea, I'm going to meet people, I'm going to meet friends. And I always tell my daughter the same thing we always tell her. It's friends of friends sometimes that can get you connected to other people.
Networking.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just that the right person hasn't yet been found. And those who choose to delay dating and marriage to work on themselves sometimes experience other problems that they hadn't anticipated once they finally feel like they're ready.
Yeah.
For example, the biological clock of women.
Yeah, so women's fertility, this may surprise people, but it begins to actually decrease in your 20s.
Wow.
I know. So attempting pregnancy after 30 can run into fertility problems. I mean, you and I dealt with that as we delayed having children until I was way into my 30s, not on purpose for many years, but the longer you delay, Norm, the results are also smaller families, right? Because the window is not quite as long. And so it's interesting that I read this statistic the other day that said there are more people dying in America than being born.
Ooh, not a good balance.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I know there are women listening who are thinking, I want to be married, I want to have children. Again, just keep trusting God to bring you the right person at the right time and give you the desires of your heart. I mean, we do hear the cry of your heart, and we long for that person for you, for God just to bring you the right person at the right time. But again, our focus today is about exposing the lies of people who are on an opposite end of that, who are saying you can only have a meaningful life if you defer and you get your own personal goals met first. And they're fostering the message that marriage isn't needed. Children are expensive. They're in the way. And I just need more me time. Me.
Just listening to that list is sad.
I know.
It's all about me.
Yeah.
It's not about others.
Yeah.
And we know once you have children, it's not about you.
No, it's not. It's not.
You mentioned that
It's
children.
good. It's good. Let's just say that. It's good.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You mentioned children and the attitude toward having them and how that has changed in terms of actually having children. Millennials as a group don't see the need for marriage, so they are having children outside of marriage at record rates. For example, in 2006, about half of U.S. adults said it was very important for couples to have children together and to be legally married. But by 2020, that proportion had fallen down to 29%.
Wow.
Today, the proportion of U.S. births to unmarried mothers is about 40%, double the percentage from 1980.
Yeah, so a real cultural shift in this
Huge.
thinking.
Yep.
We used to believe that marriage needed two parents as well, that you had to be in a committed relationship, a covenant in our world, in our faith world. We still believe that that's best for children. It's God's plan, but that isn't the story that's being told now.
No, the attitude now is that you should wait until you accomplish everything you want to accomplish. Yet the longer you have no responsibility for anybody else, the more tempting it is to continue to be self-focused. Then adjustment and accommodating another person in marriage becomes a lot more challenging. I mean, you've lived alone for all these years.
Yeah.
You have all your own stuff, and now I have to accommodate another person?
Right. Now, people do it,
Sure,
but
of
it's
course.
just a little bit more challenging is what we're saying. And this attention to self, this is the part that really bothers me about this. And this is the biggest lie, I think, in this whole conversation, is that it implies that you just can't be yourself while being with another person in a committed marriage. And it's not true.
No.
You can be separate but attached. So you can be in connection with another person and still be attached. It's the same thing when I wrote that mother-daughter book. And people would say, oh, I have to get away from my mom because I just can't be myself. Not true. You can still be your own person. You can have your own voice. You need to know how to negotiate that in a relationship. But you can be attached to your mother and still be your own person. Right. It's the same concept here with marriage. You can work on yourself while you're married. People who are already married can develop themselves.
Of course.
Many married couples continue their educational pursuits. They continue their careers and their personal growth. They just prefer to develop their self together with the other person. And here's the thing. Our brain is wired for connection with others. It's how we learn about ourselves. When we're in a relationship with other people, and that includes God as well, that's how we learn more about who we are. It's not by being isolated into some type of self-help mantra type of world.
Right. I think another one of the main drivers of delaying marriage today is delayed adulthood. Adolescence is now extended into the 20s. How did that happen?
Yeah, it's called prolonged adolescence. There's actually a term for it. And the push to grow up and be independent has shifted from post-high school now to somewhere in the 20s, right? Somewhere in adulthood.
I wonder if some of this has to do with economics because many 20-somethings still live at home. They can't afford an apartment or their own home and are more dependent on their parents for a longer period of time after they finish school to pay off debts or to try and establish themselves in a good-paying job. The rising costs of housing market, that's made it difficult for anybody to live independently.
Those are all real concerns. And when economic times are tough, marriage rates do tend to go down. So that's because a lot of people are struggling financially.
Right. And yet we know there is still a strong desire in all of us to be known by God and by others, especially intimate others.
Which can come from many places, including extended family, community of friends, your church relationships. So in the long run, intimate relationships are great, first with God and then with others to build that community and to keep you strong. It's so important to cultivate meaningful relationships. This is how we avoid loneliness.
And loneliness seems to be the plague of our culture right now. So many people. Well, as we begin to wrap up our conversation, I think we can summarize that the trend to defer marriage needs to be carefully examined. What are the issues behind it for you if you're deferring? And are those reasons godly ones? Are they led by the Lord? Do you feel like the Spirit is leading you or to wait?
We are saying that while marriage should not be rushed, we should be concerned by all the purposeful delays we now see that are influenced by secularism, personal autonomy, and self-care. If you are not called to singleness, think about the issues we have talked about. Is your reason for delay related to the cultural think, or is it based on God's word and the plan for your life? If you choose to wait to marry, we hope you'll consider why you are doing this. Marriage holds the possibility of partnership, of adventure, of challenge, and just so much more. It doesn't need to be avoided just to do your own thing. Unless you're called to singleness, and notice I keep saying that, focus on what God wants for your life and not your need to be in control. That is really what's behind a lot of this modern attitude towards marriage. I'll do it my way, when I'm ready, when I have met certain milestones. People of faith aren't ruled by self and by self-interest. Our life's purpose is to glorify God and serve Him and others. Marriage is not a boulder around your neck to drown you. It's a covenant to be honored that we put in place and was put in place by God to help you flourish. Well, that's all the time we have today. Many thanks to my co-host, Norm Mintle, who makes this show a conversation, and to our now married technical producer, Katie Sims Wilson. From all of us here at Faith Radio, we'll talk to you again next weekend. In the meantime, remember, we're doing life together, and it's better when you don't have to do it alone.
Doing life together.
Hey, thanks for listening to this conversation from the Dr. Linda Mintle Show. These conversations are available because of your support. Become a supporter now at myfaithradio.com. Please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes, and share it with friends so we can live life to the fullest, walk confidently, and find healing and hope.